Hello, everybody. Welcome to this presentation um, hosted by the Employer Rights Center. We have a very, very important discussion today. We're going to be discussing gender equity, as you know. We try to invite a wide range of people to this discussion, people from the local industry, from other nonprofits, people on staff. We hope to have a very lively discussion of how to make gender equity a reality today, or how to start having gender equity today. Very quickly, I would want to say a couple of things about the Employer Rights Center. The Employer Rights Center was founded in 1999, and we have been a worker center, a resource center for all workers, regardless of their employment or immigration status. Our mission is to serve all workers, disadvantaged workers especially, in issues about employment, immigration, and health. And throughout that time, we have learned something very important, is that unfortunately, too many people in positions of power and too many people who are learning in their careers, they're in their institutional part of their life, meaning that they're going to university, they're not quite aware of how important it is to have a sense of gender equity in everything that we do. We see it in everyday work. We see it in places where you wouldn't expect to have it, meaning very professional settings, people that have been working in service industries for years, and they do not bring a question or a sense of what gender means at their own place of work. And I would say, unfortunately, the opposite. What happens too many times is that gender is used against people as opposed to being used as a positive. So what we see every day is people having an issue at work, and you have something about their gender used against them to say, well, you know that you needed to be with your child, and I let you do that, but now you want to complain that I'm not paying you? When both rights are protected. Or, oh, you're pregnant, and now you want to mess the whole team because you want to go out in pregnancy leave? How are you not messing everybody's life? That was your choice. That wasn't everybody's choice. Why are you affecting the rest of the team? You really want to be seen as a person who drags everybody down? And unfortunately, this is not uncommon. This is common. And when that happens, unfortunately, most people don't feel comfortable coming through, because in our estimation, we don't have the kind of gender equity thinking at the governmental level, at the private institutional level, to know that for us to go from the culture where we don't have that kind of discussion to the culture where we do, we need to go from some deep-seated questions and some deep sort of reforms to be able to do that. And this is basically the reason why we want to have a monthly discussion, this same Tuesday of the month. This is the third Tuesday of the month, I think. We want to continue to have this discussion at 2, and we will update you and let you know what the topics are and who is going to be helping us present. But today we have two very, very important collaborators in this work that, for many reasons have been doing this work both explicitly and implicitly in everything that they do. And so first I want to make sure I introduce one of our board members. Her name is Terry Lapinski. She has been graciously volunteering her time to be able to have the institution that is bringing you this forward, and her amazing advocacy, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. It's something that hope she shares with you, because she brings so much to the table that when we thought about having the discussions, we could think of a few other people that could say more. So we want to thank Terry for being here and participating. And Dr. Hayo Kim, she is the director of the Kim Center on Social Balance. And she's a collaborator. We had prior discussions like this one on Facebook Live. She has a large group of equity partners, which we are very honored to be one of those throughout the county. And she's bringing some, equity research and equity strategies, hopefully to bear on all of us. And so without any further ado, here is Dr. Harold King and Terry Lapinski to talk a little about how we can bring gender equity, start having gender equity at workplaces today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alor. Thank you very much. I will open and talk a little bit about the Kim Center. We are a nonprofit based in San Diego with a national vision. Laura is absolutely right in that achieving workplace equity, both on the gender and racial / ethnicity level, requires effort from all sides. So our mission is fully dedicated to accelerating the achievement of equal status for all genders in the workplace. And what I talk about today with Terry, our hope is that both employers and employees can use this information to empower themselves and each other to work together and create a real cultural transformation. So I say that our mission is equal status for all genders in the workplace. We do use the gender lens, but we focus on multiple intersections. This means race. It also means ethnicity, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation. We do prioritize women because women are the largest marginalized group in every population. And most importantly, they're the only group whose equitable treatment benefits all other groups. It's kind of a superpower. So yes, we are inclusive of LGBTQIA plus and gender nonconforming populations. But when I refer to women, please know that this is the reason why, simply the size of their influence. Our signature initiative is called Gender Leap. It is 3 tools. There's an assessment, because in order to do anything about where you're going, you have to know where you are. So it's designed to evaluate equity levels at companies and in regions. Our playbook assigns goals and roles and timelines to all stakeholder groups. There's, again, that collaborative piece. So we need to involve leaders. We need to involve employees, shareholders, customers, however your company and your audience is designed. And then lastly, to fully integrate all the pieces together is an accreditation. And this is where companies respond to nationally standardized accountability metrics across sectors, industries, and regions, so that we can tell and companies can self-identify as moving the needle, no matter where you are. If you're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you're looking at a company to either invest in, buy from, or work for in New York City, you know, and they have this accreditation badge, you know that they have met rigorous standards that everybody is held to, the same standards that everybody is held to. And at this point, I want to turn it over to my colleague Terry to talk about herself and her experiences.
Hi, everyone. This is very strange for me. I'm much more of an in-person person, and I do have my flip chart up, so don't worry, it will seem that way. I wish that we could all be together, and I hope you'll all join in our chat today, because it's just so bizarre being at home all the time, isn't it? Anyway, thank you, Dr. Kim. I'm really, really pleased and honored to be able to join you today, and hopefully we all can contribute to your important work in some small way on gender equity. And I'm using the same definitions as you just mentioned, and primarily concentrating on the work that I've done in my lifetime around girls and women. I'd like to thank Alor for providing this opportunity. It's really exciting, and I think once I get used to this kind of a format, I'll probably like it a lot better. But for right now, I think that I really want to just say thank you to Alor and the Employee Rights Center. All of your work over these couple of decades on labor rights and immigration and health, and your recent work on the census they just so far exceed. Your impact so far exceeds the amount of people that work with you, most of whom are volunteers. So I thank you as the director, and my friend Peter Zishi as the founder. I think you've made an amazing contribution to San Diego, and I'm really proud to be on your board. It's nice to virtually meet all of you. I asked for a couple of minutes to introduce a little bit more about my background, mainly because I think that it will help me to draw on examples and for you to see that we're not alone in this world or in this county. I've worked in many different countries and in several different states in the United States. And I started out early in my career as a teacher and a diversity trainer and a popular educator. And then I did some gender action research and worked on girls' education and girls in development when I worked for the Peace Corps in Washington, D.C. I've been a nonprofit hiring manager and supervisor for over 20 years in the U.S. and in Africa. And I ran a labor rights program in Sao Paulo, Brazil, for the Solidarity Center of the AFL-CIO. So when moving to San Diego in 2008, I worked at first as a school principal, and then since 2012, I have a swivel chair, I hope that doesn't annoy you. Since 2012, I've been a chief operating officer and chief of programs for 2 different nonprofits in San Diego. And again, I say this to say that if there is an employee concern out there or a labor rights violation or a workplace gender equity issue, I've probably seen it and I've probably had to deal with it. There are new things that come up, but right up, I would say straight through up to this year, up to 2020, I've seen that changing workplace, and all over the world, women struggle. All over the world, gender issues are addressed to varying degrees. And I also am answering these questions, not just as a supervisor, but also as an employee, because I certainly in my lifetime and my long work history been discriminated against in the workplace, certainly with pay discrimination. And I've left jobs because I needed to take care of someone in the family, or I needed to go back to school in order to advance. And sometimes I had to quit the job for that reason. And sometimes I had employers who actually gave me the time to do that and thought my work was valuable enough where they accommodated that. It's not so common, but it happens. And I was always very grateful when it did. So that's kind of a roundabout long way to say that I'm really excited to be here and for this dialogue. And I hope that gives you some insight into where whatever bizarre or interesting examples I come up with, where they're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. We're looking forward to your bizarre examples. To our viewers, if you're just joining us, welcome. I'm Heo Kim of the Kim Center for Social Balance, and today I'm joined by Terry Lipinski, board member of the ERC and a career chief operating and program officer. We're talking about how you can start generating workplace gender equity today. Before, however, we get into the how, I want to start by talking about what workplace equity is. This is something that's often confusing to people. When people enjoy equal status at work, it means that no matter who we are or what our background is, our contributions are valued and recognized and rewarded for what they're worth, and everyone's judged by the same standards. However, we all know that this is not reality. It's our goal, but it is not a reality. Equity means that employers do 2 things. First of all, they recognize that certain groups are not enjoying equal status. And secondly, they commit to taking conscious steps to even the playing field. It's essentially a tool to achieve equal status and to achieve balance among genders and among races and ethnicities. It is different from equality, and this is something that I really want to emphasize. For example, if you had equal opportunity, you could say that in the law industry, you can make partner if you bill enough hours. Equity means that if you can't do all the hours in the office because you have caregiving responsibilities at home, but you're willing to work at all hours, which generally happens, you're allowed to do so. So you're getting the work done. It doesn't matter whether you're parked at your desk or not. Equity also means that if your clients are biased against you because of your gender, your skin color, your background, whatever, your supervisor, your boss, strongly advocates for you. Equity also means that if your colleagues were to not recognize your contributions because you look or act differently from them or from what they understand to be right, correct, successful, whatever, your supervisor pointedly gives you meaningful assignments and demonstrates their trust in you. This means this generates equal status. This creates a culture where everyone understands that your contributions are just as important as anyone else's and are rewarded by the same standards. At this point, we're going to put out a poll question. Does your company have a formal workplace equity initiative? We'd love to hear what experiences the audience is having. So the options are just yes, no, or we're just starting one. We have a comment here from Mary Turi, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, so I apologize if I'm butchering it. She says, yes, and then we don't get enough time to spend with our newborns after delivery, and we don't have options when it comes to breastfeeding, which is ridiculous because who is our future workforce going to be if we don't allow our mothers to take care of them? Okay, so do we have answers to the poll? Laura, I'm not sure where I should be looking. Looks like we have a combination of yes, and we have just starting one, which is a good place to be. And then our second poll question, do you have a formal budget for this program? And if you don't have a program, go ahead and mark no. The third option is obviously yes, no, no, but I was asked to make the case for one. And this third point is very interesting to me. And I'll tell you the reason for asking this. If you have a budget, it indicates seriousness by your leadership for the program. If they start a program or tell you to start a program and don't give you money and resources, what exactly are they trying to accomplish? That's the question you need to ask. But if there is serious intent by the leadership, they're going to put resources in from the get-go. Maybe there's a pilot program or something, but there has to be money in there. Okay, so it looks like we have not yet. My hope is that if you need arguments to convince your leadership that you need money and resources, we will give you some of those today. For those of you who are just tuning in, I'm Heo from the Kim Center for Social Balance, and I'm with Terry Lipinski. Terry's a board member of ERC and a career COO. Please, by the way, feel free to put questions in the chat as you think of them. We will try to answer them as we go, but we'll also allow time at the very end for questions. So based on these two questions that we just asked our audience, Terry, how would you comment on the difference in effectiveness between systematizing and not systematizing equity initiatives?
Well, I think it's not so different from many different phases that you go through in your work life when a new initiative comes in, and it's either going to be random because your boss told you to do it, or somebody had an idea, or a funder wants you to do it, or a donor wants you to do it, or a board member wants you to do it. And that's what I call random, or it's going to be intentional, where it actually comes from the ground up and you know that it's not just going to be goodwill, it's going to be transformative change. So one of the reasons I'm so excited about your work, Dr. Kim, is that you can't make systemic change. We've heard a lot about systemic change in the past few months, systemic racism and systemic sexism, and you can't make systemic change without a system, an alternative system, or else you just get chaos. So we can say it all we want, but unless someone's doing the hard work that you've been doing of working through the academics, through the theory, through the purpose of it, and then actually getting the metrics together and seeing how it aligns with the mission of the organization and really doing that groundwork of systematizing, there won't be any systemic change. There'll be some goodwill efforts. And if you don't have measurable outcomes and you don't have evidence, you really open up your organization to risk, because you're going to give some things to some people and some other things to other people in your efforts to call it an equity initiative. But if it's not based on, it's sort of all this discussion about science of the virus, right? Follow the science. If you're not following the science, if you haven't done your needs assessment and you're not coming up with consistent metrics, you're going to make more mistakes and most likely hurt your organization more. I can just say in my experience, I have all this goodwill and I'll come in and say, oh, let's do this. And 3 days later, something awful will happen because I did it without planning it and without going through the process that your organization goes through. So I learned that the hard way. And that, I would say, the difference in effectiveness is a few good things happen, a few bad things happen if you just do it. And lots of good things can happen and a real change can take place if you systematize your initiative.
Right. Thank you. So what can people do to start moving the needle on workplace equity today? We're going to talk about that now. Start by asking yourself 3 questions. What does gender equity look like in my company? How do I measure progress? And how does it benefit me/my company? And this last point is especially useful in convincing the decision makers at your company, if it's not you, that your initiative deserves a budget. So tackling the first question, what does gender equity look like in my company? And this is more time intensive than people realize. You cannot just read a lot of articles and think you know what's going on, because you have to ask what's going on in your company. One of the most obvious indicators is representation, right? Literally, what the faces who represent your company look like, or who work for your company look like. So I'm going to ask this poll question, our last one. Whom should your employee makeup reflect most closely? This is a big point of curiosity for me, because there are a lot of different circumstances, but everybody has a different opinion. And then there's also the issue of, depending on which answer you choose, whether it's your national population, the local population, your clientele or your audience, or the industry population, are you trying to reflect what the population should look like or what it does look like right now? So that's another question you need to ask yourself. And while we're waiting for the answers, Terry, maybe you can tell us what you think.
Sure. I struggled with this one because for me, it really kind of depends on where you're working and what your situation is. As I said earlier, I mean, if you're working in an environment that's if you're working in my field, which, you know, something between education, nonprofit, public service. So I went with, for my work in San Diego, I went with our clientele and audience, because my experience here has been that San Diego is a very local, even though it's a binational environment, it's very local. And I went between local population and clientele and audience. And I stayed with clientele and audience with one addition, one caveat, which is if your clientele, for example, is all one race or all one ethnicity. In other words, if you're working in a real estate firm here and everyone is white, does that mean all of your employees should be white? Of course not. If you're working in an organization, and I say all genders in this, but if you're working, let's say, in a social service organization where most of the employees are women and most of the clientele are men, do you need to balance that? So I would say it depends on the situation, but that the most important thing is to be asked that question and to ask yourself that question and have a reason for why you're choosing one answer or another. So mine is, for this one in San Diego, I think our employees should reflect our clientele, our audience, if you will, plus diversity in all genders.
That's a great answer. And we have Jen Keys here contributing that a similar answer, that they strive to represent their their students and the clients that they serve. Hi, Jen, by the way. Thanks for being with us. So, other considerations when determining what gender equity should look like in your company or your organization. At the Kim Center, we took the academically rigorous route to develop our first tool, the Gender Leap Assessment. It's based, however, on principles that are universally critical. You need to adopt metrics that are being used in the field with demonstrated measurable impact. There's a big difference between measuring levels of microaggressions, because that's actionable data and you can create education around reducing them. There's a big difference between doing that and measuring, for example, participation in an employee resource group, which there's nothing wrong with. Employee resource groups definitely speak to the demographics, the needs of the demographics who are part of it. But if you don't have specific goals for systems change related to that group, you're really only measuring how many people it align with that group. Secondly, you need to combine data from the company side with employee feedback. Only by cross-referencing this information will you get the full narrative. So you have the two-dimensional information like, what is your leadership representation, or what are your family-friendly policies? And then you need the robust employee feedback that tells you, for example, are women of color or non-conforming gender employees working longer hours than, for example, men to prove their worth? And this piece is particularly telling because evidence shows, and people, I've heard also a lot of people saying, employees whose worth is questioned, either subtly or openly or tacitly because of implicit bias, typically work harder and longer hours to prove that they can compete. Terry, I think you have some real life examples to speak to this.
Many examples for that one. You made me think about when you do like sort of needs assessment and how you want it to be mission aligned and how you want. I have sort of a strange take on it, as I said, because of working in social service where there were so many women, and a lot of times it was the male employees who felt that they did not have a career path. Even though someone, let's say a man was brought in at the top, you still had this whole middle layer where the women were looking to that. So that's sort of establishing transparent HR policies around that and making sure that you have career paths for everybody, and using your database not just to measure your grants, your outcomes from your grants, but also all the things that you're talking about right now, that you can collect that data. And it doesn't have to be the top person in the organization. If someone had come to me in my COO role with a proposal to use the database to track more around gender equity and diversity, I would have been thrilled. And we would have worked with the staff to be able to not just report on how many men and how many women work there, but really get metrics that would show that we were mission aligned. And you can't be mission aligned for your clients, for the people you're serving, and not do it for your own staff.
Right.
So, yeah, which happens all the time. I mean, and people are working really hard trying to provide that, especially in education and social services, and then they don't have it themselves.
Yeah.
And so, you were mentioning about women, for example, working harder than men to prove their worth. And it just reminds me of so many. I won't go into all the political examples in my head, but you all know what I'm talking about. And I have an interesting kind of sad personal fact, which is in my 50-year career and about 10 professional jobs, I never once had a woman who was the head of the agency that I was working for. And again, I won't say that didn't happen maybe a little bit before or a little bit after, but in my long experience, I didn't have anyone to look to in that way, a woman who I had immediate supervisors, but no one who was the head of the agency. And I'm just going to give a little plug for something some of you may have seen this week, a little plug for Kim Eng, who is Chinese American and first woman of color to become a general manager of a Major League Baseball team. She just became the general. Yeah, she just became the general manager of the Miami Marlins. She's 52 years old, and she's been working in baseball. She was a softball player as a kid, and she's been working in Major League Baseball for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And she started as an intern with the White Sox, and then she worked for multiple franchises, always at the level getting to assistant general manager and never manager all this time. And she had the first salary dispute in Major League 25 years ago. The first salary dispute case was hers. So you knew she was going to go far, and I hope she's debating that 1.5 instead of $2 million that she might be getting now. Yeah. But she said it was decades of determination. Mm. Women come up through the ranks and they have to prove themselves over and over and over again. Yeah. And sometimes you'll see that someone's brought in from the outside, and now that's becoming, even women were coming in from the outside. But traditionally in my life, it was a man that would come in from the outside and be the head of the agency, and the women would just keep trying to creep up those ranks like Kim Eng until they finally reached midlife and maybe they got the position. Again, a lot of those things are changing for the better, and that's wonderful. And I know that there are, again, men in social service who probably feel that women are taking those positions. But the point is, if we had the system and we were looking at the career paths and we had the data and we had the evidence to be able to say, here's where we want to go as an organization, and here are the opportunities for management training and mentorship that we're going to give, and then you have salary bands, and you actually say, as they might in public service, this is what it takes. These are the qualifications to get to the next step. And everybody knows that. And here are the things in your performance plan that we're going to integrate so that you can get there. If that's your personal goal and that works for our agency, you can get there. And it wouldn't be a 30-year for any gender to get to the top of the ladder if that's where they want to go.
Which is a perfect segue into my next point, which is that when you're collecting data to measure change, you want to use a consistent set of data to track over the long term. Over the last 60 years or however many decades we've collected, for example, salary data on women, we have, yes, there have been a lot of refinements in understanding the difference between working full-time and part-time and part-year, and the fact that women more often take on these part-time, part-year jobs, which actually puts the pay gap closer to 50% than 80%. But the point is, we don't really have a consistent set of data that we've been tracking over all this time. So we have a general sense of where the salaries have gone and that they're better than they used to be, but we don't know what the barriers are, or for whom, or what the progress or lack of progress has been with those barriers. And that's why it's really important to systematize and to organize and to identify your goals. This way, we're not relying just on anecdotes and general impressions that to decide whether or not things are getting better.
Yes.
I just want to pause for a moment. If you're joining us now, I'm Heo Kim from the Kim Center for Social Balance, and I'm with Terry Lipinski, board member of the ERC. We're talking about how to determine what gender equity should look like in your company. And we just covered some general principles for evaluating the status in your company and the importance of a 360-degree perspective. Now, I'm going to describe some of the questions that you should be asking from the company side or of the company side. Whatever you ended up deciding what your employee makeup should reflect, does your leadership reflect that too? Remember, you need a minimum of 30% representation to move the needle from any background. So you can't just put one Black trans woman on a team of white men and call it done. Do you have comprehensive work-family policies? Do you have a strong internal labor market? And that means things like hiring from within or internal job postings or management training programs. Very important question to ask. Do you have a team that has the technical skills to deliver beyond compliance? So if you're implementing blind screening of interview candidates or formal or informal sponsorship programs, mentorship programs, networking programs, can your team knowledgeably execute? And do you have enough diversity, for example, to create a diverse interview panel? I've heard of some companies getting around this by outsourcing their interview panels. They simply recognize that they don't have appropriate diversity within, so they're looking for a solution, which is great. You need to ask yourselves, how are we holding ourselves accountable? Publicly and or internally to your stakeholders, to your employees, to your other leadership. With GenderLeap, we also track family leave use, family benefit use. This is something that isn't typically collected by companies because it's not an insurance reporting requirement, but it really should be. It gives us the two-dimensional data, but it can also provide important signals as to whether taking family leave is affecting employees' pay and advancement beyond simply the amount of time that they're taking off. And it can also signal, if you look at whether men are taking family leave or not, it can signal the possibility that there are cultural barriers within your company that need to be addressed. On the employee side, you want to ask them at a minimum things like, do you believe this organization values your contributions? Do you believe you can openly use family benefits and still get promoted? How many hours a week do you work? And that gets back to the working harder question that we posed earlier. And analyze your results by groups. If you see significantly different levels of responses between, for example, Latinas and white men, it's something you want to look into further. And then finally, a full pay audit is recommended, but at the very least, evaluate what you know by position, gender, and race and ethnicity. That would be the absolute minimum. Again, for any new attendees, we just talked about what workplace gender equity looks like. And next, and we're going to launch into the next question you want to ask yourselves about in order to create workplace gender equity, how do I measure progress? And Terry was touching on this a lot just moments ago. The Kim Center's GenderLeap playbooks follow these core principles to get the best results in the most efficient way. Target your strategies based on your evaluation results. However you choose to evaluate what's going on, make sure that you're designing your strategies based on those results. Clearly outline roles and goals and timelines for all your stakeholder groups. A Harvard study has found that 75% of diversity trainings are failing or making things worse, which is worse. And part of that reason is because they only target one group. usually managers. You need to bring everybody in to the same level of buy-in. Base your strategy on methods with demonstrated success. There will definitely be a time where you'll need to be creative. So accomplish as much as you can right now with methods that have been proven to have impact. By the way, our Gender Equity Wiki at kimcenter.org is a useful resource. It's free, and it's free to become a member as well. And it has a lot of information about what companies are doing right now, as well as what research has shown works out of places like Harvard Business School. And then lastly, schedule your reevaluation. Do not allow it to just fall to chance. Schedule your reevaluation, and then, schedule your assessments, and then right afterwards, reevaluate your playbooks. Create long-term vision goals, but really short-term practical goals. And then this brings me to the last question that you want to ask yourselves. How does gender equity benefit my company? And you will need this to promote your initiatives, convince your leaders to commit resources, and get buy-in from all stakeholder groups. At this point, I'd love to get some real-life input from Terry.
Real life. Well, you know, from the COO standpoint, if I think like a COO, it's all about minimizing risk, right? And the cost of that risk. So how does gender equity benefit my company? If you have less lawsuit, if you have less turnover, if you can educate and train and empower your staff, and as I said, let them see that there are career paths for them, and you have those transparent policies, you're much less likely to get into those situations where someone feels discriminated against, and not just feels, is. So from that standpoint, if you just want to think about risk, you would definitely minimize the risk. If I look at from my educator and programs perspective, as I said before, if your staff is working all day to help clients succeed and to have better lives, which is the mission of so many nonprofit organizations, and to decrease poverty and break destructive cycles, and if you really want everyone to have better lives, you want everyone to have better lives. What are you doing to support? What opportunities are you giving to your staff so that they're excited to be there and stay? And in doing that, how does that balance out with gender equity? Is there any one gender, any one group that's getting more of those benefits than others? Because that will make things worse. So it's a matter of consistency, of fairness, of morale. Everybody needs to survive and thrive. And you also want them, the other way it benefits your company, I think, is that they become role models, and they are future leaders, and they think of themselves as future leaders, and they become champions for your organization because they've been treated fairly and transparently, and because they see an opportunity for themselves. And then you're not spending so much on PR, good or bad, because you've got people that really know that you care about them and that they can succeed in your organization. If I think of when I was working in Brazil with the trade union movement, I saw a concerted effort. They came up, and this is probably 15, 20 years ago. About 15 years ago, they decided that the unions were really male dominated, and that they really, really wanted, they had some wonderful women, and all genders actually, who were really part of the grassroots trade union movement, but were not getting leadership roles. And several of the unions got together and asked for training funds to be able to really prepare people to be leaders, and within that, women leaders were particularly identified, and leaders of color, because they saw what was their organizations and who was leading them, and it was monolithic. And so they really went through a needs assessment. They really went through a planning process. They probably didn't have all the wonderful tools that Dr. Kim can offer, but they did it systematically, and their system changed. in many ways. Many war women became leaders right up to the top of the confederations. And I learned so much from working in other countries that sometimes, like countries in Africa, where we say the words like underdeveloped. But when it comes to equity, and when it comes to women leaders, and when it comes to leveling the playing field, in a certain way, they leap over what we call our development and go into what needs to happen right now in their countries. And that can be in technology, it can be in pretty much any policy making, but I've seen it happen. I know it can happen. And so I've been fortunate to be able to bring those things back to my work in the United States and come in with the idea and the attitude that this is a participatory venture. And if all of us can work together on this, it will benefit all of us, and all boats rise, including your organization and the people you serve.
Absolutely. And if you consider that the issues, if you wanted to just describe them in a list, you have retention, you have productivity, you have innovativeness, you have, as Terry mentioned, lawsuits, and all of these have very real hard costs associated with them. I can throw a bunch of statistics at you. If you want to know what they are, please feel free to email me, or even look on our website, kimcenter.org. They're there. And if you want to understand how much impact that can have on your bottom line, just think to yourself how many women you have in your company. Just picture that. And then ask yourself, how many of those women thought about leaving my company today because of discrimination? And then you get a whole new perspective on what you could lose and what you could gain. One last thing, women are better leaders in crisis. So gender equity could actually be critical to the economic recovery from the pandemic recession. I'm just going to close with that nice bit and see if we have any questions. Doesn't look like we do at this point. I know we covered a lot of information. We're just about at time anyway, so that brings us to a close. I want to remind you that this is a monthly series, so please join us again, same time, 2 o'clock next month on December 15th, Tuesday. And if there are any topics in workplace gender equity or workplace equity as a whole that you want to know more about, please put it in the chat here or go ahead and comment on Facebook. We want to know what you want us to talk about. Thank you very much, and thank you so much, Terry, for being my collaborator in this.
Foil.
And we look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye-bye.